I'm Judge Margaret McEwen. I have the privilege of chairing the ABA Rule of Law Initiative. And on behalf of our Board of Directors and all of the 500 plus ABA ROLI staff, both in Washington and around the world, I would like to welcome all of you here today to our annual celebration. This is our celebration of the ABA's efforts to promote the rule of law around the world. We do have a packed agenda. I know we're going to try to get people back to the House, but it adjourned a little late, so we're starting a little late, but continue your eating, not your talking, but your eating, and we'll move ahead with the program. I do want to say a very special thanks to our host committee, to Jim Silknet and to Sharon Gerstmann and their committee who did a huge amount of work to put this together, so please join me in thanking them. We also thank our especially generous sponsor for the Rule of Law Champion, and that is the World Justice Project and its chair, Bill Newcomb, former ABA president. Thank you, Bill. As you know from our program today, our focus is on Colombia and the peace process, and we're honored to have several guests here from Colombia and the United Nations. Ambassador Carlos Morales, who is from the Colombian mission to the United Nations, and also Natalia Arboleda, who is the chief legal counsel for Colombia before the United Nations. So we welcome you as well. Let me begin by inviting to the podium our also champion of rule of law and justice, and that is our current ABA president, Linda. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge McEwen, and welcome, friends. It's wonderful to be here in what is always a highlight of the ABA annual meeting, an opportunity to learn about the great work of the Rule of Law Initiative, its board, council, staff, and volunteers, and what they're doing to advance the rule of law around the world. One of the great privileges that I've enjoyed serving as ABA president has been to represent our association in the global community of lawyers, to come to know my colleagues who lead the bar associations of other nations, and to lend my voice in support of lawyers throughout the world. We've been privileged to have a number of these bar leaders with us during this meeting, and many of them are here today. So I'd like to extend a particularly warm welcome to the distinguished international guests and invite them to be stand and recognized by all of us. So if you'd all please stand if you're an international guest. We all know that the rule of law is a journey, not a destination, and that even in the most developed democracies, we have to work to reinforce the laws and the institutions that promise a fair and just society. And in that work, we have solidarity with our colleagues around the world, sharing through our Rule of Law initiative our own lessons learned in advancing the rule of law. I want to pay special tribute to the ABA ROLI board, its regional councils, its staff, its volunteers who serve this mission on behalf of the American Bar Association. Thank you all for what you do. You make our association proud. Thank you very much. Enjoy the program.
Thank you, President Klein, for those remarks and for your leadership of the ABA and our rule of law efforts over the past year. My name is Elizabeth Anderson, and I have the great privilege of leading the ABA Rule of Law Initiative and its team of more than 500 staff and volunteers working in more than 50 countries around the world to advance the rule of law. This year brought new rule of law challenges in the form of rising authoritarianism in many countries, coupled with conflicts that sent record numbers of refugees and migrants fleeing from their homes. Lawyers were often on the front lines of these rule of law challenges, and they themselves faced a backlash for their efforts. Against this backdrop, ROLI staff and volunteers were energized and motivated and feeling an urgency in our work. We worked tirelessly in many countries around the world and scored some big victories, many of which are highlighted in the annual report that's on your chairs. I hope you'll take some time to leaf through it and read about the remarkable change our partners are making around the world. From helping Syrian refugees access legal aid in Turkey, to dramatically reducing the length of pretrial detention in Haiti, our programs are making a meaningful difference in people's lives. People are what makes this kind of change possible. We often talk about the rule of law in abstract terms. We talk about a country of laws, not men, and that no man is above the law. But we know that in practice, it's actually people who help us realize the rule of law. Finding and supporting these change makers around the world is key to ROLI's success. And in doing that, we draw on the strength of the American Bar Association and its 400,000 people. We draw on their expertise and their pro bono spirit and spread that volunteerism around the world. They make important personal connections with colleagues in all of the countries where we're operating and inspire and support these change makers in their own efforts. In 2016, this pro bono contribution to ABA ROLI's efforts totaled $3.2 million in assistance to our programs. To honor this contribution, last year our board established a new award to highlight particularly extraordinary pro bono contributions. A selection committee comprised of Paul Moxley and Sheila Cheston chose our 3 honorees, and Paul was to have been here today to present the awards. You will have noticed I am not Paul Moxley. He unfortunately was called away for some urgent business and asked me to present the awards, and it's certainly my privilege to do that. First, let me invite up to the stage Brian Taylor, County Prosecutor for Canyon County, Idaho, and Adjunct Professor at Concordia University School of Law. Brian has been a key contributor to the success of ABA ROLI's legal education program in Tajikistan. Law schools in Tajikistan, like most law schools in the former Soviet Union, still present legal material in rote lecture-style classes that do not effectively prepare young lawyers for practice. Our partners in these law schools are eager to learn about US-style interactive teaching methodologies, and that's where Brian came in. Last year, Brian developed a 200-page Train the Professor manual on interactive teaching methodologies and adult learning concepts. And then he traveled to Tajikistan to train law professor colleagues there on using these methodologies. The manual has since been distributed to 7 schools throughout the country and is strengthening teaching throughout Tajikistan. But Brian didn't stop there. He went on to help ABA ROLI design and implement a study tour to Washington, D.C. and Boise, Idaho. He brought 11 of the professors he'd worked with in Tajikistan to Idaho and helped them see firsthand what interactive teaching looks like. In his time serving with ABA ROLI, Brian has contributed nearly 400 hours of his time and approximately $200,000 worth of pro bono assistance. He built strong relationships with his Tajik colleagues and served as a gracious host for them here in the United States, making sure that they were not only professionally enriched, but also got to experience that American pastime of a Boise State football game. I understand they also got to enjoy the culinary delights of a tailgate.
They did.
Brian has garnered the respect of the professors that he worked with and exposed them to new ideas that they are using to transform legal education in Tajikistan. Thank you, Brian, for your contributions to the rule of law in Tajikistan, and please accept this token of our appreciation for your contributions to ABA ROLI.
So out in the foyer, Betsy told me to make a very colorful metaphor. So I brought a toque from Tajikistan that I'm going to wear, so in honor of my colleagues over there. There's a Tajik proverb that I learned the first time I went there, Zabon Doni, Jahon Doni, that I think summarizes my time working with the Tajiks. It is, to know a language is to know the world. And the one thing that has been common with my colleagues and friends in the Republic of Tajikistan, the great men and women in law professor roles, and myself, is this passion for the rule of law. In 2010, going back from just 2016, an unusual partnership formed with my office in rural Idaho of Canyon County and the legal profession in Tajikistan and through the ABA ROLI. At the time, Tajikistan was implementing a new criminal law procedure, or a criminal code, and we had a study tour and a group of about 30 prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges come out to Idaho. And that was the start of this process. They studied our processes, procedures, they studied our systems. They went on ride-alongs with law enforcement officers, and we even had them do stays at different people's houses, a foreign exchange, so to speak. From there, what was instrumental is the ABA ROLI used that as the stepping stone to establish the real first defense bar in the country of Tajikistan. And then fast forward 5 years, is what Betsy was talking about, is we decided to change our focus from the actual practitioners in the profession to working with law professors, as we figured if they had the passion and implementation of the rule of law, they can expand that knowledge with all their students in the next generation coming into Tajikistan. And I think the results have been absolutely astronomical and overwhelming. I was over there a couple times last year. I was there for about 2 weeks and got to experience the culture with them, the hat you can see, and then they came over for part 2 where they enhanced their trainings with the 2 law schools in Idaho, University of Idaho and Concordia University, where professors taught them, but they also had to do the instruction on how the rule of law should be implemented. So I thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a very humbling and pleased experience. It's been a very rewarding experience in my world, and we're working on part 3, which is now remodifying their curriculum. And I think the partnerships, we've trained over about 100 individuals, and that's going to continue. If anyone is in Washington, D.C. in October, the Tajik delegation will be coming here, so I encourage you to meet up with them. They are extraordinary individuals. So thank you so much for this recognition, and I'm so proud to be part of ABA ROLI, which is transforming the world. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Next, let me invite Alex Rossmiller to come up to the stage. Alex is an assistant U.S. attorney right here in, gotta move from, there we go, right here in New York, in the Southern District of New York, serving in its public corruption unit. Last year, Alex became a key contributor to a program at ABA ROLI called the International Justice Sector Education and Training Program, or IJET for short. The IJET program brings motivated reformers from the countries in which we're working to the United States for a 4-week intensive fellowship. And there they study an area of legal reform that interests them. They get paired with a U.S. expert in that area, and they develop a change plan of a reform that they intend to implement when they go back home. Later, their mentor travels to their country to check in on how that reform is going and provide ongoing support. A year ago, Alex became a trusted mentor to Sanin Bagunic, head of the Economic Crime and Corruption Unit in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Sanin came to the IJET program eager to gain expertise that would help him in his ongoing efforts to strengthen and reorganize the unit he runs in the prosecutor's office. And he found in Alex inspiration and expert guidance in these efforts. In October, Alex traveled back to Sarajevo to check in and to support Sanin's efforts further. Today, that reorganization is underway as Sanin and his team work to clear case backlogs and improve prosecutors' specialization and training in prosecuting the most serious forms of corruption that continue to plague Bosnia and Herzegovina. Sanin sent a message to Alex today to express his own appreciation, and I'd like to read a little bit from it for you. During my stay, Sanin writes, during my stay in the U.S., I met with my counterparts from the justice sector, government agencies, and the private sector, all of whom kindly shared their experience and lessons learned, which I am currently trying to implement in our system. My stay in New York and mentorship with Mr. Alex Rossmiller had an invaluable impact on my learning. During my mentorship, Alex used every minute and opportunity to show me the dedicated and tireless work ethic of the U.S. federal prosecutors. Proof of Alex's dedication to his pro bono work was his travel to Sarajevo to provide further support to Bosnia's prosecutors. Alex, congratulations on winning this award. I am deeply convinced that the award is in the right hands. Best, Sanin Bagunic. Thank you, Alex, for your efforts to advance the rule of law in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Please accept this token of our appreciation and the admiration of your ABA colleagues.
Thank you very much. Southern District prosecutors are always brief, so I'll be quick. I'm extraordinarily grateful to ABA ROLI for providing this opportunity for me and for my office to work with Sanin and the prosecutor's office in Bosnia. It really was an incredible process of working with him both in Washington, D.C. and in New York to reform and transform his office into an office that has a unit to particularly focus on public corruption. It's been an exciting year to work on public corruption in general, and certainly there was a bit of an oversight that there wasn't a unit particularly focused on that area of law. And to be able to work on it both, again, in Washington and in our office with judges who met with him and individuals at nonprofits and schools, and of course members of the ABA, was an extraordinarily helpful learning experience, not just for him, but for me and for other members of my office. So again, we're very grateful to have had the opportunity to contribute, and thank everyone here for helping to make that happen.
Finally, our board decided that one of our pro bono awards should be given to an institution, recognizing that it can be critically important that a pro bono volunteer's employer also supports this work. This year's institutional recognition goes to Hogan Lovells, LLC, represented here today by Julianne Hughes Jennett, a London-based partner in Hogan Lovells International Arbitration and Litigation Practices and co-head of the firm's Business and Human Rights Group. Julianne was a gender-based violence trainer for ABA ROLI's Balkans Regional Rule of Law Network program. In May of 2016, under this program, Julianne prepared and led 4 trainings for advocates and civil society representatives from Macedonia, Albania, Serbia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and contributed over $187,000 in in-kind contributions toward ABA ROLI's programs. She led the Hogan Lovells team in close cooperation with local experts to develop a curriculum for the trainings that was tailored to the needs of each of the countries in which they were carried out. Julianne brought her extensive litigation experience as well as knowledge of international human rights law, gender discrimination law, and other standards relating to violence against women to this training. She worked tirelessly with local experts to tailor the programs to the needs of our partners. Her pro bono contribution to the project also served as a model for the lawyers in these countries, whose participation was conditioned on their agreeing to provide pro bono assistance in turn. And many of those who participated in Julianne's trainings have gone on to carry out that pro bono assistance in the Balkans region. Thank you, Julianne and Hogan Lovells, for your significant pro bono contributions. Julianne, please accept this token of our appreciation. And to you and your colleagues at Hogan Lovells, thank you for the difference your pro bono efforts have made.
Thank you very much. I'm really honoured to accept this award on behalf of Hogan Lovells. It was obviously a team effort, it wasn't just me. I didn't bring a hat like Brian, but if I had a prop, the one prop that I'd probably place on the podium this afternoon is some homemade Balkans wine, which we were given everywhere we went in the region to thank us for our work. As Betsy said, it was a tremendously rewarding endeavour for Hogan Lovells. We trained over 80 advocates and civil society lawyers on international and domestic standards in relation to gender-based violence. And we also sought to try and sensitise some of the older advocates, particularly of the male gender, to the particular dynamics of gender-based violence. And finally, again, as Betsy noted, to really talk about how our experience as lawyers in countries like the UK and the US, in which there is a very rich pro bono tradition, which doesn't exist in the Balkans for reasons that are very obvious around capacity, but to really inculcate that. And as Betsy said, we have been really gratified that since delivering the training, we have been able to connect with some of the advocates with whom we worked to try and assist victims of gender-based violence in those regions, and we have a couple of projects ongoing. Finally, we also have been asked to look at delivering similar training in the Lebanon. So it was, for us as a firm, it was really important that it would be sustainable and not a one-hit wonder. And for that, I am extremely grateful to ABA and in particular Beth Givens and her team in Macedonia for helping us to participate in such a fantastic endeavour. Thank you.
Many thanks to Brian, Alex, Julianne, and Hogan Lovells for the pro bono spirit that they represent. If I may, I'd like to ask everyone in the room, because there are many volunteers in this room, who have ever contributed pro bono assistance to ABA ROLI to stand and be recognized. So now you can ask them about how they got involved. And those of you who are not standing, who are interested in getting involved, please let us know. We would be delighted to involve you in our programs. Now it's my distinct pleasure to invite our keynote speakers to the stage. Ambassadors Rapp and Urrutia can join Judge McEwen here on the stage. And I'll say a few words about our work in post-conflict settings. That is going to be the focus of our keynote discussion here today. And unfortunately, in many of the countries in which we work, conflict, the threat of conflict, or the lasting effects of conflict define the rule of law challenges we address. Our responses range from supporting women's participation in the redrafting of Libya's constitution, to promoting reconciliation between formerly warring parties in Mali. Even in the Balkans, 18 years after the end of the wars that tore that region apart, our work continues to be defined by the residue of conflict as we work to build a network between bar associations in the countries of the Balkans so that the Serbian and Kosovar lawyers can find common ground and become part of the fabric that keeps peace and fosters prosperity in that region. Because conflict is such a central challenge in our rule of law work, we decided to focus this discussion on the particular challenges in post-conflict settings and shine a spotlight on one bright spot on the rule of law horizon, that is the Colombian peace process, where we see for the first time in decades some rule of law promise. Judge McEwen will moderate our panel and also introduce our rule of law, our Human Rights Award winner today. Judge.
Thank you. I do notice that when Betsy asked the ROLI volunteers to stand up, that for whatever reason, our former president, Paulette Brown, and Ambassador Rapp didn't stand up. But I do want to say that we've had the very great privilege, the three of us just returned from Tanzania, where ABA ROLI hosted Justice Sonia Sotomayor, along with all of the chief judges and justices of the East African nations. We had a very successful meeting on judicial independence and transnational crime. So volunteer and pro bono efforts come in many forms. To set the stage for today's conversation, we want to pay tribute to the ABA's Human Rights Award winner, Patricia Guerrero. This award is given annually, and it's a collaborative effort among various groups and sections. ABA ROLI, the section of international law, Center for Human Rights, the litigation section, and also the section on civil rights and social justice. Our honoree this year has been a tireless advocate on behalf of women in the backdrop of both the Colombian Civil War and violence, but also in the peace process. For decades, the situation has left women homeless and brutalized by all sides of the conflict. Patricia is the founder and a legal advisor to an organization called La Liga de Mujeres Desplazadas, the League of Displaced Women, and that's located in Cartagena. What they do is support and advocate for internally displaced Afro-Colombian women, also for indigenous women. So she's really represented these women not just in the courts of Colombia, but also in international courts. But she then went beyond legal representation, and she's been helping these women find peace and shelter following the conflict. So in 2006, she and the league that she established created the City of Women. And the City of Women is a women-led community of homes where the displaced women can actually live with their families and begin to rebuild their lives following the conflict. I think it's also important to note that she and her colleagues did this in the face of incredible number of threats, in the face of continuing violence, but she never gave up. So while she comes up to offer us a few words, I'd like to show you a short video on the City of Women.
Ellos cada vez que entraban, mataban. Y no tenían que ver con niños, no tenían que ver con mujeres. Ellos asesinaban a todo el mundo. Y en el pueblo mataban a diario, mataban 3, 4 personas. Yo llegué en el 99 a la ciudad de Cartagena con mis niños, 6 niños. Nos vamos a una invasión que se llama la Isla de León en el Pozón. En el 2000 yo conozco a la Liga de Mujeres Desplazadas.
todas las mujeres eran desplazadas forzadas, con otros crímenes conexos, por ejemplo, mujeres que sufrieron violencia sexual, mujeres que sufrieron tortura, que sus familiares fueron desaparecidos, que fueron víctimas de masacres, etc. Pero todas teníamos el común que eran mujeres desplazadas.
Cuando llegamos aquí solamente era montaña, montes, montados, árboles, no había nada. Cuando estamos en el cultivo, o sea, ya llegó el momento que yo tenía que venir a responder por mi casa. Tenía miedo de venir a enfrentarme a coger una pala, a hacer una mezcla, porque yo no lo he hecho. Quizás yo no voy a poder.
Aprendí a preparar una mezcla. Aprendí a figurar un hierro, aprendimos muchas cosas. Y a la hecha que todas estas casas fueron hechas con nuestras manos.
Para mí era muy importante que las mujeres tuvieran el registro de la propiedad, no solamente por el tema legal, sino también por el tema de que ellas se sientan propietarias, de que ellas son las dueñas de su casa y no es el esposo, no es el papá, no es el hijo, sino ellas mismas. Esto da un sentido de la libertad.
Bueno, nosotros hemos tenido mucho contraste aquí en este barrio por el asunto de las amenazas, de problemas de las niñas, las violaciones. Y uno tiene que, muchas cosas nos han sucedido.
Hemos recibido tantas amenazas en los últimos años. Hay problemas graves con las Fuerzas Armadas, hay problemas graves con la policía, porque ese es un territorio también de narcotráfico. Esta es una situación permanente de resistir a estas formas ilícitas de violencia que se van posesionando en las comunidades.
El momento que tuvimos como que un poco más difícil fue cuando asesinan al esposo de la compañera Simona, Julio Miguel. La quema de nuestro refugio, ¿sí? Y desapariciones que ha hecho, incluso violaciones de mujeres. Actualmente la necesidad ahorita mismo la más grande es el tema de la salud y la educación.
Total, hay muchos derechos que están relacionados con la vivienda, ¿no? El derecho, por ejemplo, a los servicios públicos. Si una vivienda no tiene servicios públicos, si una vivienda no tiene agua, pues no es vivienda. Y el derecho al agua es el derecho a la vida.
Hacer parte de esta organización y estar aquí en la Ciudad de las Mujeres, se siente uno más segura, sí, porque somos un grupo de mujeres que pienso que a pesar de todo lo que nos ha pasado, nos hemos mantenido en una resistencia pacífica.
Estamos capacitadas, que podemos ir a cualquier parte y hablamos sin miedo porque nos hemos capacitado. Estamos siempre luchando, pero gracias a Dios, mire todos los logros que hemos tenido, tener un techo donde vivir.
Gracias a Dios, aquí con una, con la otra no se pelea. Aquí no se pelea, aquí vivimos unidas. Aquí los hombres no tienen nada que decir, que esto es mío, no. Esto es de nosotras las mujeres.
La casa es para las mujeres como una extensión de su cuerpo. La casa es el lugar donde se hacen los hijos, donde se hace el amor, donde se hace la comida, donde se cultiva, donde se tienen los animales, donde se hacen los recuerdos, donde se hace la vida y donde se dignifica la vida de manera permanente de las mujeres. Yo quería que eso fuera de ellas.
Patricia, we are totally in awe of your commitment, your creativity, and also the impact that your work has had on so many women in Colombia. She received the award at the Distinguished Visitors Dinner on Thursday night, but join me in congratulating her again on this extremely well-deserved award. Thank you. Thank you. It was a groundbreaking peace agreement, and one of the most novel things is that for the first time ever in a peace agreement, that the references to gender played a major and important role in the text of the agreement and will play a major role as we move forward. So now I'd like to have Patricia follow on where the movie left off and to ask you, what are the challenges ahead?
Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, because this is the first time that the women are going to face this peace agreement with the gender mainstream, that it was really tough for us to be part of the agreement, you know. Now we have to face a lot of challenge, now, particularly related to the transitional justice. Well, all the point of the agreement is really important, but for me, as a lawyer, as women who work in the last 18 years for the right of the victims, for me, the possibility to the access to transitional justice for victims of the displacement, the forced displacement, and for the rape and all these kind of gender crimes are really important. No, because for me, this is really the stone, the heart of the possibility to step forward of the historical discrimination that the women have to face, you know, in my country, but it's not just in my country, in all wars around the world. So that's, it's for me really important. Yeah, this is one of the other is to support the women's grassroots organizations who have to face this problem, because there are the victims. And there are in isolated places, as you know, as the City of Women, which is not in Cartagena, it's in north of Cartagena, in 45 minutes, but we have victims in all these Montes de Maria area where the conflict was terrible. So yes, we have to face many things. We need support, we need international support. Women's organization at grassroots level need money, need possibilities to go into this new transitional justice system. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Gracias a usted. Well, it has been a remarkable period for the Colombia peace process. And to give you some context for the work that Patricia has done, I'd like to welcome two distinguished former ambassadors, Ambassador Carlos Urrutia, who is former Colombian ambassador to the United States and is also a member of ABA ROLI's Latin America and Caribbean Council. We also have with us Ambassador Stephen Rapp, and he was the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice, and also now serves as a special advisor to the ROLI board. What is quite amazing is that this epoch of armed conflict lasted nearly 55 years. And after many negotiations, there was a plebiscite to approve the peace agreement, and it lost by a very narrow margin of 50.2%. They went back to the negotiating table, heard the discussion and the comments of the opposition groups, had revisions and amendments, and then finally the Congress approved the agreement. And so November 2016 was the official end of the armed conflict with FARC, the government, and the citizens of Colombia. So I would like to ask Ambassador Urrutia to set the stage, to tell us where we are today in this process and what are the challenges facing the country following the armed conflict.
Well, thank you very much, Judge McKeon. I'd like to thank also ABA ROLI for inviting me to address this topic that is so important to us Colombians. Let me begin by saying that the agreement, as Judge McKeon correctly said, was finally agreed upon and submitted to vote in November, early December probably, and it is now in full implementation mode. This is a very complex process. It is complex because you can imagine what it means changing the minds of people, people that were accustomed to living with a conflict that lasted, as Judge McKeon was saying, over 55 years. So, but I think it's been going well, and it's right on schedule, I would say. And the reason I say it's right on schedule, the agreement provided for a chronogram of 180 days to complete the early stages of the process, which were to demobilize the armed forces of FARC, which was already accomplished. That took place. They immobilized, they entered.
Will you tell us what FARC stands for?
Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia. Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces. And it has a further acronym that says EP, which means Ejército del Pueblo, the People's Army. So, as I was saying, FARC has already demobilized. They went into 26 special designated zones where they demobilized. Camps were set up for them to be there. There was some problem with actually, building the camps and getting everything together, logistics. But the fact of the matter is that FARC are already there, and they are due to this term of 180 days is due to expire. And once it expires, these special zones will return to normalcy, if you will. And that is when the rank and file of FARC and the leaders will have to begin their process of reintegrating themselves into society. The other aspect, which is, of course, crucial, probably one of the most important aspects of the accord, is that the FARC were forced to deliver their arms. And there was a UN special commission put together for the purpose of receiving the arms from FARC. That has made progress, and in fact, tomorrow is the last day, I can say. So there were a few extensions to the terms that were set forth for purposes of delivering the arms, but the fact of the matter is that this is a task that is about to be completed. It will be completed tomorrow. The UN Commission has put all these arms into containers, and they are going to be destroyed, and eventually, as if I'm not mistaken, something will be done. I mean, some statues and things like that will be made with the proceeds from the destruction of these arms. So those are very important facts that have already occurred. The other aspects that I think are important is there is already constitutional amendment in place for everything that has to do with transitional justice. The transitional justice system is actually a complex system because it involves several commissions. One of them is charged, or there are several commissions, and I'll point, there is a commission charged with investigating the truth and establishing principles for coexistence and non-repetition, which is, of course, part of the accord. There is a special unit charged with searching for disappeared persons. There is a special peace jurisdiction that will be composed of a chamber that will be charged with the determination of the truth and for the responsibility of crimes and determination of facts and conducts, and a chamber charged with the definition of punishable conducts. And then there is a chamber that will be devoted to addressing amnesties and pardons. That is also part of the peace accord. The special tribunal has two first instance chambers, sections, they are called. A second section devoted to reviewing sentences. A third section that will act as an appellate section. And there is a final section devoted to stability and efficacy. And of course, the problem is that now we are right in the middle of appointing the magistrates, the justices. There will be 38 justices that will be part of these arrangements. People have applied to become to be elected as a magistrate, and this is a process that will end by a 5-member commission appointing the various justices. There will also be some 18 alternates or 14 alternate judges. But in any event, the list has already been put together. The candidates have been, the list of candidates has been put together, and this 5-member commission will appoint the judges within probably the next 2 months.
So there's a lot to stand by for. I know you had mentioned there have actually been 2,000 applications of judges and magistrates to fill these positions, which is pretty extraordinary. This was an internally driven process. You mentioned the UN, but it was really the national will that brought it to fruition. But I do want to ask Ambassador Rapp, what role, if any, did the United States government play? And also, where does the International Criminal Court figure in, particularly because the United States is not a member?
Okay. Well, let me just first say, we often hear in our world that it's not possible to have both peace and justice. And Colombia teaches us that it is possible. And certainly in the Colombian context, as in so many, it's absolutely essential. We had this referendum, and there wouldn't have been 49.8% of the people vote for it if those that committed really serious offenses were going to get off scot-free. There had to be accountability. We also had, as you say, the International Criminal Court, of which Colombia is a party, and they're a monosystem. The International Criminal Court is actually part of their judicial process. Interestingly, when these amendments that passed that allowed this sort of framework, constitutional amendments, they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court of Colombia actually invalidated a constitutional amendment that would have allowed suspended sentences because it was inconsistent with their obligations under the International Criminal Court. So that's the supreme law. So one has to work a process that ensures that justice is done here to have public support and also to meet their international obligations. The United States strongly supported President Santos and this peace process, and we had a special envoy, Bernie Aronson, who was engaged, frankly, with both sides. I went to Colombia and also engaged with the International Criminal Court on this issue because, one, we're very concerned that there is accountability. I mean, Patricia talked about the victimization of women, those that have survived now living in the city of women. But there has been mass crime during the conflict and mass rape. We had a peace agreement 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, with the paramilitaries. They promised to confess and get sentences of not more than 8 years. They confessed to anything except rape. And so, making sure that it's a system that actually brings forth the truth and repairs the injury to the victims to the extent that that's possible is really important. What was eventually negotiated does provide that only those will be prosecuted that bear the greatest responsibility. The most responsible includes the FARC. Of course, we're engaged in massive crimes. We're familiar with their kidnapping of people that they held under brutal conditions for sometimes for more than a decade, their abduction of children, some under 10 who became child soldiers, all the other massive crimes that have afflicted Colombia. There was also military crimes, the famous false positives, killing civilians and saying, oh, they're combat deaths, and counting them in statistics, and potentially some high-level commanders who were familiar with the fact that this was being done. So there needs to be accountability on that side, too. But basically, it will be a situation where only those most responsible will be held to account. Political crimes like treason and sedition, that kind of thing, those can be amnestied. But serious violations can be prosecuted, and those that admit to those serious violations and make full reparations and take full responsibility can get alternative sentences, some kind of confinement, maybe a home confinement, for a period of 5 to 8 years. If they only make a sort of a half confession, they can, but still essentially plead guilty, they can get 5 to 8 years in prison. Those that don't, that minimize their conduct, can get 20 years. In the United States, I'm a former U.S. attorney. I mean, we're certainly familiar with giving people a break for acceptance of responsibility, for focusing on the high-level actors that make things happen. It is a compromise. It's not perfect. There's certainly victims that weren't thrilled about it, though I understand some of the most victimized communities gave the strongest support to the referendum. And it's that public support of it, the support of victims, and a system that I think has worked through the peace and justice process of the paramilitaries, have developed, I think, a really strong ability to achieve justice here. And so it's something I think that can work. Meanwhile, we've engaged with the ICC. The deputy prosecutor came out in 2015. The ICC's had an open case on Colombia for 10 years. They could step in at any time and prosecute a general. They could prosecute one of these FARC leaders, probably blow up the whole agreement by doing that. We've encouraged them to stand back and to evaluate the whole thing. The deputy prosecutor, a good friend of mine, James Stewart of Canada, spoke in Colombia in 2015 and sort of laid out guidelines that I think the peace agreement, if it's properly implemented, can meet. But there's still some challenges. The amendments, for instance, that had to be passed included eliminating command responsibility for the military. ICC doesn't like that. There's groups, victims groups that are already in court challenging that, because that'll make it harder to prosecute these commanders who knew about these violations and did nothing. There's possibility that FARC could serve in office, in political positions, in parliament, even while they're supposedly in confinement. That may be inconsistent. There are issues that still have to be worked out, but certainly the will of the people, I think, is represented by this, and it shows that with very tough negotiations and with a very careful balance, you can achieve both peace and justice.
Well, at ABA ROLI, we've had some experience with some of the big international accountability projects, such as documenting the atrocities of Milosevic. But much of our work is actually done in what some people would call local courts, which we call national courts. And that's where, for example, in Democratic Republic of Congo and also Central African Republic, we're working very closely there because those are countries racked by violence, and we're working there with prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the government to try to bring some justice, particularly in these gender-based crime issues and things that Mrs. Guerrero had spoken about. I've always been an advocate that international law finds its home best in national courts, but I'm interested in your comments on that. And we're, apart from what is probably more elite commission that will be established, what about the ongoing presence of the national courts in doing justice? Do you have a comment on that?
Well, you know, the special system of justice will have prevalence in all matters that have to do, in all, if you will, cases that have to do with the conflict. That is, actions committed prior to December 16, I think is the date, prior to December 16 of 2016, will have to go before this transitional justice system. Anything that happens after that will still go to the ordinary courts, to the criminal courts, first of all. Second of all, and I think also important, the magistrates will have to, the magistrates that will be appointed will have to regulate the proceedings. There are no set proceedings yet. Right. Their first duty will be to establish what happens and how the proceedings will go forward.
And as we know, procedure can drive substance and results.
Exactly, exactly. The other aspect that I wanted to point to is, unfortunately, we're not done with our conflict in the sense that there remain groups, but most importantly, a group called the ELN, Ejército de Liberación Nacional, National Liberation Army, that is still active. There are ongoing negotiations between the government and the ELN, but the ELN has been very, very difficult in coming to terms. There have been numerous exercises going back 25 years by successive governments. This is, I think, a very good chance for the ELN to come to terms with the government, because to the extent that they do, that they sign a peace accord with the government, they will also have access to this transitional justice system. And if they don't, they will have to go to the ordinary courts.
Well, one of the big, I think, challenges in the post-conflict situation is the citizenry, the hearts and minds situation. And that referendum where you have this hair trigger vote, and then the Congress comes in and with amendments finally approves things. So we're seeing a lot in different other countries, this sort of populist skepticism. So I want to ask Ambassador Rapp about other situations where this has come up, and then turn to you, Ambassador Urrutia, and ask you, how do you see going forward that this momentum and now this resolve, which has finally been legally put into place, how is that going to keep moving?
Well, I think one of the things that we've learned in international justice in some of these conflict situations is how important it is to maintain a great deal of information in the public, a great deal of transparency. In Sierra Leone, where I was chief prosecutor, where we had a mandate only to prosecute the top guys, we prosecuted a total of 13, including the president of the neighboring country, Liberia, Charles Taylor. Of course, there had been 50,000 people killed, hundreds of thousands of people sexually violated, amputated, and everything. We had to develop an outreach program with representatives all over the country. Myself and my predecessors gave hundreds of speeches in front of community assemblies, sometimes thousands of people meeting at night, because they needed to meet at night to run the generators in order to screen pictures of what was happening in court in Freetown and also in The Hague. It's extremely important because everybody wanted to know, why'd you prosecute this guy and not this one? Was there some kind of corrupt decision made? I mean, these school children would be quoting our statute to us. So you really do have to answer. And sometimes it doesn't come easily to judges and prosecutors in some systems, particularly civil law systems, where it's always sort of all behind closed doors. But you're doing it for the public, and the public really has to understand it. You also mentioned this question of other crime. I mean, it's important to note that the paramilitaries, that FARC made a great deal of money on drug trafficking. Right. There'll certainly be drug trafficking in the future. There'll be other organizations that are out there. There are people that fear the power of the military to gain control of businesses and resources, et cetera, on a corrupt basis. So it's going to be necessary also to have a strong judicial system for those other crimes. I mean, it's important to take off the table the idea that people are doing this somehow for a good cause. It won't be, that's off the table. It's not a cause anymore. But now, you know, people will be doing it for the usual bad cause, which is getting rich or showing their domination. And so it's certainly the work of ABA ROLI and other aid programs through our State Department aid programs, et cetera, to strengthen the rule of law generally, to fight corruption, to fight drug trafficking, et cetera. That remains very important. And people will want to know that there's no diminution of that effort.
Any comment there?
Well, I think Ambassador Rapp is absolutely right. This is work in progress and will be work in progress for many years, unfortunately. We have a challenge these days because there has been an increase again in the area of land with coca crops. And of course, that's an ongoing work hand in hand with the U.S. government. The U.S. government is, of course, quite concerned.
Yeah.
But the Santos administration is making a huge effort to try to dismantle that. That is to persuade people together with FARC, and FARC is contributing to that, to persuade people, peasants, to substitute crops. And to those that do not agree to substitute crops, the coca plantations will be destroyed, and we'll see. The idea is to reduce that to, I think, something like less than a third of what exists today. But I think one of the issues that really will capture the hearts and minds of people is the fact that people in those areas that really were the victims of the conflict are feeling that the conflict has gone away, and that they're able to, some of them, return to their homes, return to their lands, to engage in productive activities. And that's something that really, I think, will over time, will capture the hearts and minds of people, and make them understand the benefits of peace. The other aspect is there is, I think, a very powerful result already. It used to be during the conflict, there is a military hospital in Bogota. It's called the military hospital. It used to be filled, Hospital Militar it's called, but in any event.
Translated as military hospital.
In any event, the issue is that it used to be filled to the top with victims of the conflict from the armed forces. Young men and women that were, had been either wounded in action or had suffered from landmines. This was a hospital that was a horror place on a constant basis for the past, 30, 35 years, and even further than that. Well, these days, the hospital is now empty with, it no longer deals with that type of injuries or wounds. It is taking care of other types of health problems for members of the military, but it's no longer a hospital in a combat zone. And people are understanding that this is already happening. And I think that this is a very powerful image that will persuade people that we are in peace for the long run. The whole system is really focused on victims. As Patricia Guerrero was explaining, victims have expectations. Right. They expect to be repaired. And the agreement calls for reparations. And further, for non-repetition commitments on the part of those that committed those crimes. Those that will go before the tribunal will have to commit not to repeat their actions, and will have to tell the truth, as Ambassador Rapp was saying.
Well, we've learned from our work through ABA ROLI that there are a number of countries where in this post-conflict situation that the victims are not integrated into the conflict. And one example of that was our work in Mali, where, of course, there was a reconciliation commission, but they hadn't yet even met with the victims. So one of the things that we did was to actually facilitate a meeting between the Reconciliation Commission and the victims. So there's been a huge amount of progress here already in the Colombian process. And people are, as you say, they're going back home, they're integrating back into the community. But how do you keep alive the importance of the victim and making sure that the victim's voice is continued to be heard beyond this formal process?
Well, again, victims, as I was saying, are really the focus of the whole peace process. And victims there are already in place mechanisms for victims to demand reparation. And there are many civil society organizations helping victims come to terms with what is going on and with taking advantage, if you will, of the mechanisms that are provided by the peace accord and by this system of justice, the transitional system of justice. And I think the success of the transitional system through the tribunal, through the special tribunal, will have to rely significantly on the contributions from victims, because if victims are not heard, if they don't have the right to appear, and if they're not listened to, their causes are not taken care of, well, probably we will not have truth.
You know, we focused today on Colombia, but it's pretty difficult, given the world situation, to not at least touch on Syria. The ABA ROLI has had a project in Syria on the border where we're working with Turkish lawyers to work with the refugees who are still coming across the border, and if not coming across, they are trying to resettle in Turkey. So I would like to turn to Ambassador Rapp and ask you what's going on there. And we have this hope that we've seen from Colombia. Do we have any hope in the Syrian situation?
Well, there's hope, but there's also immense devastation, 500,000 dead, horrendous crimes committed by the regime. The UN inquiry says 80 to 90% of the crimes by the regime, including probably murdering more than 50,000 people by torture in their own prisons, attacks on hospitals and humanitarian workers, et cetera. Horrible crimes, which actually I think led to the rise of ISIS, which is also committing massive crimes. And it's not been a place where we've been able to find a path to justice immediately as we have elsewhere. Security Council is blocked. We can't create a tribunal like we did for Yugoslavia, Rwanda. We can't send it to the ICC like we did for Sudan and Libya, because the Russians and the Chinese blocked an effort to do that in 2014. What we can do is to document these crimes and support efforts to really build a solid evidence. And as a former international prosecutor, that's so essential. I mean, people can believe somebody is responsible for a crime, but proving particularly high-level connection takes documentation, and indeed in the Syrian context there's immense amounts of it. 750,000 pages have been brought out of government documents that have been analyzed to develop cases already through documentation programs that we support, that have been supported by certain governments. Now with the Security Council blocked, the General Assembly in December by a vote of 105 to 15, with a lot of abstentions, but an overwhelming vote, established a mechanism for justice in Syria that's sort of like an office of the prosecutor that can begin to develop cases for a future international or Syrian court, but also for national courts. In my current role, I'm engaged with German and French and Spanish and Scandinavian prosecutors who actually have jurisdiction universally, sometimes based on a citizen victim, sometimes based on a perpetrator turning up. And cases are being developed there, and we've got some high-level people that have been identified on whom warrants will soon go out. So it's possible to have justice, but obviously much better, as in Colombia, if it happens at the national level. But I mean, those who say, well, we've got to forget it, let Assad rule the country, you know, half the people have been displaced, 500,000 dead, 13 million people driven from their homes. It's impossible to have a peace for them to go home and sit down with and let people continue to do it. What happens to the 100,000 people that are still in custody? Well, they remain in custody. I mean, there are issues that have to at least be developed. There has to be a solution developed on the basis of truth, or the conflict simply continues. And one of the things that frustrates me in the Syrian peace negotiations is the issue of at least establishment of truth about the detainees. Most of these people don't know whether their children are dead or alive. You know, at least establishing the truth isn't a part of that peace negotiation, and as a result, those representing those victims can't agree to it. And so it has to be part of it. But with these cases that was being developed internationally, I think the signal will, as cases are filed, be developed that there will be justice. It'll be like what happened from the 1940s. People may be arrested 20, 30, 40 years after the fact. And really the message is if you commit these horrendous crimes, there's no getting out of it in this life. And so I think we're moving toward that, but it's with the international system and the Security Council blocked. It has been very painful and difficult, and it also stands against everything else that we've done in the United States in supporting justice from the time of Justice Jackson as a chief prosecutor at Nuremberg, to the Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, other kinds of things, the support of national processes, which the United States has been a leader on a bipartisan basis, and we really need to continue that leadership, which is something I may talk about in the House of Delegates tomorrow.
Good. Well, I think looking ahead, we can see that this Colombian peace process is going to be a landmark in both transitional justice and also in international justice. And you've both brought a sense to us that there is hope, that justice and peace can actually coexist quite well moving ahead. I think now more than ever, as we look across the world, do you see why the rule of law is needed? Now more than ever, we need ROLI. We need all of your support as lawyers and judges thinking about the rule of law, where you can intersect, where you can help. And it's not just in foreign courts, but it can be in national courts. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming this afternoon, for your support of ABA ROLI, and I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking Ambassador Urrutia and also Ambassador Rapp.